Hi guys, I'm Julia Weatherspoon. Thank you for having me. I am an architectural designer here in San Francisco, California, and I'll be talking about taking up space and remixing the role of the architect. So that's me, little Julia in Northern California. I was born to two non-creative parents, and somehow my interest in architecture and design was sparked when I was just 12 years old, and that is kind of the beginning of my first transition. And even though I carried on growing up, I never really saw anyone that looked like me who was interested in design. But my love for design didn't set me up for what being a designer meant in professional practice and the professional landscape. And so I wanted to add to what Dr. Angie Scott was saying about the statistics. There's over 115,000 architects, and 20% are women identifying, and about 2,500 are identifying as Black. And then the shocking number that comes is the number for Black women. So Black women make up 0.03% of architects, and that's less than half of a percent. And there's less than 500 even now. Shout out to Norma Sklaric, but and there's the even dwindles more when you consider non-binary identities. And so it goes without saying, design needs a facelift, and this is what it looks like when you search on Google for architects, and that you could tell that there is a lack of BIPOC representation there. And even Whitney M. Young, a civil rights leader, challenged this in a speech a little over 50 years ago at an AIA convention, and still not much progress has been made since then. So I actually want to back up a little bit. I know there's people in the comments saying architorture, which is very true. But like, what do architects do, besides, working too much? And I think there's a lot of, ambiguity around it. And maybe people are thinking that, we draw things, like we sketch things, like we think that we design beautiful things. But really, the reality of it is that a lot of the time we are computer monkeys and we're stuck in CAD, or we're stuck in a digital space, and not really thinking about the humanity of it. So remixing the role of the architect is something that I want to do, and I'm doing in the transition, and adding some flavor to it. So starting with architecture and acknowledgement and visibility, I want to make sure that people know what architects are doing, but also what Black designers and architects are doing that are different, and pushing the envelope. And one of the funny things that is not as serious is me really being visible on social media and doing it for the gram. So these are a couple of snapshots of how I'm showing how a Black girl is getting super technical and super geeky about architecture and design in a digi tours that I do in my Instagram stories. And then another thing that I am passionate about is architecture and education, and teaching our youth about architecture and exposure for youth in underserved communities. So I've taught in communities in East Oakland and West Oakland, and they actually have programs where they are learning how to design in 3D software, and they're building out of Legos, and they're learning how that contextually relates back to where they are in space and time. And then the next thing in transitioning is architecture and cultural collaboration. So this was a project with Mike Ford, shout out Mike, and a lot of hip hop artists, designers, and architects got together to think about like, what is design in a different lens, and who gets to design. So my design team really talked about lyrical analysis, drew on whiteboards, we transcribed onto media, and then laser cut and create this kind of end piece that signified a way that everyone viewed and inhabited a song. And then moving on to architecture and spatial and cultural stewardship, which is where we really want to be, which is where the transition really, starts to take flight. It's about moving from architects as an egotistical architect into humanitarian design. And it's that spatial shift, and reclaiming our cities, and understanding who is allowed to be in space, and ownership of space. And that's the work that I'm doing a little bit with National Organization of Minority Architects. And then the last thing is my main project that I'm working on now is about Black cultural mapping and cultural keeping in the spaces of Black and Brown designers. So the last thing that I want to really leave everyone with is to, push the narrative, and really take up the space in the industry that you're in the discipline that you're in, and really be a steward of that design practice. And so I'm thinking that we really need to turn the heat up on ourselves, right now in this moment, and we really need to stand in our power. And that is my talk. Thank you so much.